Look at your rose right now, the one growing beside your fence or your front path. You've fed it, watered it, and watched it explode into bloom all through June. But July is the month that quietly decides everything. This single month decides whether you get a glorious second wave of roses or a tired, leafy bush with almost no flowers left. Most gardeners get July completely wrong. They keep doing the one thing that silently steals their late summer blooms, and they never even know they did it. I know, because I did it myself for years. I nearly gave up on a beautiful old climber back in the summer of 2009, absolutely convinced it was dying on me, when all it truly needed was one small change I had never been taught. Before we're done, I'll show you the exact feeding secret that rose growers at the Royal National Rose Society understood more than 100 years ago. And it works on the rose you already own, the one you've nurtured for years, not just on brand new plantings. So let me start with the thing almost everyone does wrong, because it's so small you'd never suspect it. It's the way you take off a spent flower. You walk past your rose, you see a faded bloom drooping and going brown, and you pinch it off right below the petals. It feels tidy. It feels like the right thing. I did it that way for the better part of a decade. But here's what I didn't understand. When you snap off just the flower head, you leave behind a long, blind. That stub sits there for weeks doing absolutely nothing, and the plant pours its energy into holding it up instead of making a new bloom. Your rose isn't lazy in late July. It's confused. You've been telling it to rest when you meant to tell it to flower again. Here is what changed everything for me. Instead of pinching just under the petals, I started cutting much lower down the stem, all the way to the first leaf that has 5 leaflets on it, facing outward from the center of the bush. Most rose leaves near the top of a flowering stem have only 3 leaflets. Those are weak growth points. The leaves lower down, the ones with a full set of 5 leaflets, sit above a fat, healthy bud that's ready to launch a whole new flowering shoot. Cut just above one of those, about a 1/4 inch above the bud, on a slight slant. The Royal Horticultural Society has recommended cutting back to a 5-leaflet leaf for generations. And once you see why, you can't unsee it. You're not just removing a dead flower, you're choosing exactly where the next rose will come from. Now watch what happens over the next 2 to 3 weeks. The bud below your cut swells, then breaks, then races upward into a fresh flowering shoot. On a healthy, repeat flowering rose in July, you can have new blooms opening in as little as 5 to 6 weeks from that cut. That's the difference between a bush that quits in August and one that carries color right through to the first frost. But deadheading correctly is only the beginning, because there's something happening underground in July that matters even more than what you do with your scissors. And this is where most people, even careful ones, lose their roses without ever realizing the cause. Here's the part almost nobody talks about. July heat doesn't kill roses through the leaves. It kills them through thirst you can't see. A rose in full flower in the middle of summer is one of the thirstiest plants in your whole garden. An established shrub rose can pull 15 to 20 gallons of water out of the soil in a single hot week. And the mistake I made for years, the one I see in almost every garden I visit, is watering little and often. A quick splash every evening with the hose feels caring. It feels like you're doing right by your plant. But that shallow water never reaches the deep roots where it matters. It soaks the top inch of soil, then it evaporates by noon the next day. Meanwhile, the real roots, the thick anchor roots 12 to 18 inches down, are going bone dry. The rose starts dropping buds to save itself, and you can't figure out why the flowers stopped. What roses actually want in July is the opposite of what feels natural. They want a deep, slow soak twice a week, rather than a light sprinkle every day. When I water my roses now, I give each established bush around 4 to 5 gallons at a time, poured slowly right at the base, so it sinks deep and pulls the roots downward instead of up. Deep roots are what carry a rose through a heat wave without flinching. And I always water in the early morning, never at night, because water sitting on the leaves in the warm dark is exactly how black spot and mildew take hold. The University of Illinois Extension has said this plainly for years. Water the soil, not the plant, and do it early so the leaves dry fast in the morning sun. Then comes the piece that quietly doubles the value of every drop. Mulch. After that deep watering, I lay down a good 2 to 3 inches of mulch over the root zone, keeping it a couple of inches back from the actual stems so the wood doesn't rot. Well-rotted manure, garden compost, or even bark chips all work. That layer of mulch keeps the soil cool and moist through the worst July afternoons, and it can cut how often you need to water almost in half. I've knelt down and pushed my fingers under a mulched rose during a heat wave and found the soil still damp and cool, while the bare bed next to it was cracked and dusty. The mulched rose was still blooming. The bare one had already given up for the summer, but even perfect watering and perfect mulch won't save the situation I want to talk about next. Because some of you are looking at a rose that isn't just thirsty. It's a rose that already looks like it's giving up. Yellowing leaves, hardly any flowers, long bare stems with a sad little bloom stuck right on the end. Maybe it's a rose you've had for 10 or 15 years, one that used to be the pride of your garden, and now you're half afraid it's simply too old. So let me speak directly to you now, the ones with the tired, struggling, established rose. This next part is for you, and it might be the most important thing I say. Here's the truth that took me far too long to learn. A struggling mature rose in July is almost never a rose that's dying. It's a rose that's exhausted and overgrown, and the kindest thing you can do is something that feels frightening the first time. You cut it back hard in the middle of summer. I know how that sounds. Everything in you screams that you don't prune a rose in July, that you'll shock it, that you'll lose what few flowers are left. I felt exactly the same the first time I tried it, on that old climber I mentioned, the one I nearly dug out in 2009. I took a deep breath and I cut a third of the plant away in the second week of July, right into the tired, leggy growth. I honestly thought I'd finished it off for good. What that rose did next changed how I gardened forever. Within 3 weeks, it pushed out thick, red-tinged new shoots from low down on the plant, growth I hadn't seen in years. By the end of August, it was carrying more blooms than it had shown all season. That summer cutback does something a spring prune can't. It removes the tired, blind wood that's just draining energy, and it triggers what rosarians call a basal break, a brand new cane rising straight from the base of the plant. Those basal breaks are the future of your rose. They're the young, vigorous canes that will carry your best flowers for the next several years. An old rose without new basal growth is slowly winding down. Force one of those breaks in July, and you've reset the clock. So if your rose looks worn out, don't reach for the spade. Reach for clean, sharp secateurs. Take out any dead or diseased wood first, cutting back to healthy green inside the stem. Then shorten the longest, tiredest stems by about a third, always cutting to an outward-facing bud so the center of the bush stays open to air and light. Give it that deep soak we talked about right afterward, and a fresh layer of mulch. Then leave it be and let it answer you. In my experience, it will, almost every time, as long as you do one more thing. Because pruning and watering wake the rose up, but they don't feed the new growth you've just demanded of it. And feeding in July is where the real secret lives. The one I promised you at the start, the one nearly everyone gets completely wrong. That single month of July is where so much of this knowledge lives. And if you want to go even deeper into what your roses are truly asking of you across the whole season, I've put everything I've learned over decades of growing into a complete guide called First Bloom and its companion volumes Deep Roots and the Full Bloom System. Together, they walk you through every critical window of the rose year. The cuts, the feeds, the timing, the mistakes the big fertilizer companies never wanted you to catch on to. You can find the full set linked in the description for $67, and I promise you it will pay for itself the very first summer you use it. But let's come back to what's happening underground right now, because there's something happening in July that matters even more than what you do with your scissors. Let me tell you what most people do, because I did it too. All spring and all summer, they feed their roses a general rose fertilizer, or worse, a high nitrogen lawn-style feed, right up until autumn. Nitrogen is the nutrient that pushes green leafy growth. And in April and May, that's exactly what you want. But when you keep pouring nitrogen on a rose in mid to late summer, something quietly goes wrong. The plant makes soft, sappy, leafy shoots instead of flowers. Those soft shoots are a magnet for aphids and disease. And when the cold finally comes, that tender growth hasn't had time to harden, so it dies back and weakens the whole plant. You end up with a big, leafy, flowerless bush that struggles through winter, and you never connect it back to the feed you gave it in July. Here is the secret that changes everything, and it comes straight from the old rose growers who knew their plants better than any label ever could. In July, You stop feeding nitrogen for blooms and you switch to potassium. Potassium, sometimes called potash, is the nutrient that hardens growth, ripens the wood, strengthens the plant against disease and cold, and above all, drives the formation of flowers. It's the difference between a rose that makes leaves and a rose that makes roses. The old growers at the Royal National Rose Society, founded back in 1876, understood this so deeply that experienced rosarians reached for sulfate of potash in midsummer as a matter of course, long before the fancy modern feeds existed. And the most beautiful part is how simple and cheap it is to do. Let me give you two ways to do this, and both of them are things you can start this very weekend. The first, and the one I trust most, is sulfate of potash, sometimes sold as sulfate of potash. You can buy a bag for just a few dollars, and it lasts for years. In mid-July, I sprinkle a small handful, about 1 ounce. That's roughly 1 level tablespoon, evenly around the base of each established rose, out where the outer roots reach, never piled against the stem. Then I gently scratch it into the top of the soil with a hand fork and water it in well. That one feeding, timed for the middle of July, hardens the new growth, feeds the flower buds forming for late summer, and quietly prepares the whole plant for winter. It's the single most important feed of the entire rose year, and it's the one almost nobody applies. The second way is even easier, and it's a trick British gardeners have passed hand to hand for generations. Ordinary tomato food. The same bottle of liquid tomato feed you'd use on your tomatoes is packed with potassium because it's designed to make fruit and flowers, not leaves. From the first week of July onward, I feed my roses a watering can of diluted tomato food, mixed at the strength on the bottle, once every 10 to 14 days. It's cheap, it's everywhere, and it works because it's giving the rose exactly the potassium it's craving at exactly the moment it needs it most. If you've got a bottle of tomato feed in your shed right now, you already own one of the best kept secrets in rose growing, and you probably never knew it. Now here's why this feels like discovered knowledge rather than something off a garden center shelf. Somewhere along the way, the big fertilizer companies decided it was simpler to sell one all-purpose rose feed for the whole season. One bag, one message, use it all summer long. It's easier to market, and it sells more product. But that convenience buried a piece of timing that careful growers had protected for over a century. The knowledge that a rose in high summer doesn't need more green, it needs to ripen and to flower. The wisdom never disappeared. It just went quiet, kept alive in the notebooks of old rosarians and in the trial beds of the horticultural societies. And now it's yours, and it takes about 2 minutes to apply. Let me put the whole July picture together for you, because this is where it all clicks. You deadhead down to a strong 5-leaflet leaf, so the plant knows exactly where to send its next bloom. You water deep and slow, twice a week, in the early morning, and you lock that moisture in with 2 to 3 inches of mulch. If your rose is tired and overgrown, you find the courage to cut it back by a third and force those young basal canes that will carry your best flowers for years to come. And then, the piece almost everyone misses. You stop feeding nitrogen and you switch to potassium. Either a single mid-July handful of sulfate of potash or a fortnightly can of tomato feed, so your rose ripens, strengthens, and floods your garden with a second wave of blooms right when your neighbor's roses have quit for the year. I want you to picture the two roses side by side, because I've watched this happen in my own beds. One bush was fed nitrogen right through the summer, watered with a nightly splash, and deadheaded with a careless pinch. By the middle of August, it was all leaf and legginess, a few sad blooms on long bare stems, aphids clustered on the soft new tips. The other got the deep morning soak, the mulch, the proper deadheading cut, and that mid-July switch to potassium. By late August, it was covered, absolutely covered, in fresh, richly colored roses, the foliage firm and healthy, still going strong when the morning started to cool. Same variety, same bed, same age. The only difference was what I did and didn't do in one single month of July. And I want to gently take away the fear that's probably still sitting in the back of your mind, the worry that your rose is simply too old or too far gone to bother. I've revived roses that were 40 and 50 years old with nothing more than a summer cutback, a deep drink, and that potassium feed. Roses are astonishingly forgiving. They want to grow. They want to flower. They've been bred over thousands of years to bloom again and again, and all they're really asking is that you read the season correctly and give them the right thing at the right moment. July is that moment. Miss it, and you lose a whole half of your summer. Catch it, and your rose will reward you in a way that makes every other gardener on your street stop and stare over the fence. There's one more small detail I've learned to watch for in July, and it's worth 30 seconds because it protects everything else you've done. Keep your eye on the lower leaves for the first signs of black spot, those dark, ragged spots that spread upward and strip a rose bare. July heat and humidity are when it strikes hardest. If you see it, pick off the affected leaves and gather up any that have fallen, because the spores overwinter on that fallen foliage and come back to haunt you next spring. Good airflow from your summer pruning, water on the soil instead of the leaves, and that potassium feed hardening the plant's defenses all work together to keep black spot at bay. It's a small habit, a 2-minute walk around your roses with a keen eye, and it saves you a world of heartbreak in August. I'll leave you with the thing I wish someone had leaned over the fence and told me 20 years ago, before I nearly dug out a rose that just needed to be understood. Your rose isn't fragile, and it isn't finished, no matter how tired it looks in the July heat. It's simply waiting for you to speak its language for one crucial month. You now know the exact cut, the deep drink, the courage to prune, and above all, the mid-July switch to potassium that the old rosarians never wanted anyone to forget. You're not the gardener who loses a beloved plant to bad advice anymore. You're the one who quietly saves it and gets a second summer of blooms as your reward. So tell me something, and be specific, because I read these. Which rose in your garden are you going to treat first this July? Is it a climber, a shrub, a David Austin you've babied for years, a grandmother's rose you can't bear to lose? Write it in the comments right now and tell me where in the world you're gardening from, because I love picturing all these roses across the country and across the ocean getting the July care they've been begging for. Don't just think it, actually leave the comment, because this little community of ours grows stronger every time one of you shares what you're growing. And if you refuse to let your favorite plants die from lazy one-size-fits-all advice, then you belong here with the rest of us who garden with our hands and our hearts. Subscribe and stand with the gardeners who dig deeper, question the label on the bag, and protect the plants we've poured our years into. Because next time, I'm going to show you the one thing you must do for your roses in late August and early September. The quiet mistake that ruins next year's blooms before winter even arrives. And trust me, it's not what the fertilizer companies want you to hear. I'll see you then, out by the fence, with the roses. I'll be honest, everything I just showed you is only the beginning. Inside the Blooming Garden Circle, I share the full guide, picking up right where we stopped. And if you get stuck, you can ask me your own question, and I answer myself a real person, not a robot. You'll belong alongside gardeners just like you. Just point your phone at the code. Cancel anytime with one click. I'd love to have you. I'm Mary. Now, one careful cut can bring your roses a second wave of blooms this season, but the wrong snip could cost you all of it. Let me show you exactly how, right here next.